I'm doing everything half.
It's great. Okay. We're on. It's live. Welcome everyone to this Talkback with Rahim Thawer, the author of The Mental Health Guide for Cis and Trans Queer Guys. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum. The Bureau is an all-volunteer, independent queer bookstore that we founded in 2012 and that has been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. And today we're being helped by the wonderful Jeffrey Archer, our volunteer. And volunteers is what keeps this place going. Volunteers and donations. So I'm gonna pass it back. We especially encourage folks to make a donation if you know you won't be buying a book. If you're able to make a donation and buy a book, well, then you should. So I'll pass that around.
You're rolling in it.
So there's some change in the bag if you need it. There's also a QR code on the back if you'd like to give through Venmo, or you can buy a book. And those of you watching online, if you'd like to make a donation to the Bureau, you can go to our website, or you can just give through Venmo at BGSQD. So our regular business hours are Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then on weeknights, we often stay open later for events. And it being June, we have many events this month. 'Tis the season, also known as Gay Endurance Month, and we will endure. So please check out our calendar. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room. Or if you're watching online, you can do that on our website, bgsqd.com. And before I introduce Rahim and JT, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. The Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a fundamental part of our collective queer liberation. And we encourage you to take one of our free little zines about why we feel it's important, especially for queer people, to speak in solidarity with Palestinians at this moment. So those are all around the store. Please take one, share one, and read those. And now, please give a very warm welcome to Rahim Thawer and queer social worker and psychoanalyst JT Mikulka. And feel free to take the mics out if you like.
Thanks, Greg. Is this distance okay?
Yes.
All right, thanks, Greg. So Rahim and I figured out I am much more of a planner than he is. So you're gonna see me referring to my plan quite a lot. So first, I just want to welcome everyone here. Thanks for coming. I am myself very excited about this book and my friend having written it. I've known you for what, like almost 10 years now?
Yeah.
I've had a chance to read this. I think it's really, really great.
JT read it in a week, folks.
So like Greg said, my name is JT Mikulka. I'm a social worker and psychoanalyst in private practice here in New York City. We are going to talk today about Rahim and his book, and just a little blurb about it. This guide, it examines the social determinants impacting mental health of queer men, including internalized shame, heteronormative milestones, disenfranchised grief, and body-conscious culture, and offers therapeutic tools such as cognitive behavioral techniques, Gestalt roleplay, and psychodynamic inquiry to foster insight and resilience. We're going to talk for a little while, then we'll have time for some questions. We'll have a little activity for everyone to do. Before I formally introduce Rahim, I just want to give some guidelines for our talk a little bit. When we talk about mental health, when we talk about issues of queerness, transness, gender and sexuality, we can tend to get into some sticky subjects that are uncomfortable, that cause a lot of anxiety, and that inherently means we're more likely to make mistakes. We're also talking about a community that's quite large, right? We're talking about people of color, we're talking about Indigenous folks, we're talking about white folks, we're talking about cis men and trans men. The queer umbrella is a very large one. So we are inherently going to have to take some shortcuts in our conversation, or if we might inherently make some mistakes that might feel like we're not actually talking about you, and we might not be in that moment. But you might also be afraid to ask questions because of those possibility of mistakes also. I want to encourage you to lean into that, to lean into asking questions anyway. Just as we might make mistakes, you might, and we're going to learn from those rather than push them away. Use them to learn new ideas, new ways of being, new aspects of creativity, and building community together. Rahim. This is Rahim Thawer. I have a bit of a bio here that I'm going to read and shorten a little bit. Rahim's a registered social worker, psychotherapist, and Canadian certified supervisor. He's also a consultant, public speaker, and writer. He's the founder of Effective Consulting and Psychotherapy Services, which he's written 3 or 4 books through that for mental health providers to help with their practice. He's delivered nearly 200 presentations and talks that inspire critical conversations and reflection on mental health, interpersonal effectiveness, systemic oppression, and innovation in queer relationships. Rahim is also has 3 forthcoming books in addition to this one, which is just incredible.
It's because I have no friends.
Do you want to say anything about them?
Sure, yeah. Well, this book that we're going to be talking about today...
these books.
Yeah, no, I know. The one we're talking about today is a self-help book. It's written for the community at large, but the ones that are upcoming are The Politicized Practitioner, which is mostly for counselors, social workers, therapists, and it's about being, just as the title suggests, politicizing our work, thinking about fat phobia, racism, power differentials, all kinds of things. The other one that's coming out is it's a co-edited volume, so I didn't write the whole thing myself. It is a collection of stories, poems, letters by LGBTQ Muslims. I'd like to say globally, but it's like a lot of North America and a few folks from other places. And it's about being queer and Muslim and about our journeys around mental health. And so it infuses a lot of culture and spirituality into practices of healing and also pain. And that comes out in the spring of next year in April.
And the other one?
The Politicized Practitioner, the publisher didn't give me great guidelines, so apparently it's too big to be published as one book, so they're gonna do it as a trilogy. So one part will come out in sometime November, and then January, and then March. They've got a whole plan.
Cool. So I really am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to all of that.
And with your reading speed, it'll be like no big deal.
Well, I didn't do all the activities. We'll get to some of the activities in a minute. I'm really excited about them, actually. I think this is a really, really great book for people. So I met Rahim about 10 years ago. Rahim was working with another friend who I had met at around the same time, doing bathhouse-based counseling,
Yes.
which I thought was just incredible. And so I was really interested that I got to be introduced to you, and we got to talking. And I'm so honored that you asked me to be here with you.
Thank you, I'm honored to have you. And my friend Mark, who's in the audience, also, I met him through LinkedIn because he was interested in the bathhouse counseling program.
Oh, awesome.
It like perked up the ears of a few select folks who were like, what?
Yeah. And it was really successful.
It was.
Yeah.
It was cool. I learned a lot.
All right, so let's get into it a little bit.
Mhm.
I have a little bit to say about this book for folks who haven't read it, who haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. But I really enjoyed reading it. While it's written for kind of the every queer GBTQ man, I've already found it useful in my practice with patients. So I think that speaks to the versatility of it as well. So I'm wondering, in just broad strokes, who's the book meant for and how do you imagine them using it?
Sorry, I'm just tripping on broad strokes and versatility. Those are aspirational. I would say the book is largely for queer and trans guys. And it took me a long time to figure out how to write in this way, like in the self-help tone. And so you'll find that the book, and each chapter speaks directly to you. And then there's case scenarios throughout that are composite of clients I work with, my own experiences, some of it fictional, but that's intended to make it relatable. I think therapists can also use it. There's lots of therapists who are not queer, but we'll take like diversity training of sorts to try to be more aware of how to support LGBTQ people. And when they do that kind of training, it's good, but it's often pretty surface level. And so if they were to use this book, they might get a better sense of some of the subcultural challenges that queer people experience, or get an insight into just the fact that we live in multiple worlds, right? And so I think that could be helpful. I think for service providers that are not therapists, I have a colleague in Calgary who, as soon as he got it, he lived through it fairly quickly, as you did, and he was like, you know what, I think this could be a blueprint for a group therapy program or like a workshop series that can happen all year for us. And I was like, great, yeah, like it's there. You can use it that way. That is, so I think it's versatile in those ways.
I mean, I had it in mind while I was talking to a 21-year-old straight white guy about his dating life.
Well, yes.
What I love about queer writing is it gives us access and insight to the on the margins experience that is also universal.
Mm-hmm.
It is particular to us, but it is part of the human experience and can be really taken anywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, straight people need a lot of support. They don't know it, but they do. And I think like chapters like, so while sexual health and coming out might be taken on in a very specific way by LGBTQ guys, something like internalized shame and connection seeking or managing rejection, other folks can relate to that.
Yeah.
You know, we all internalize terrible things that make us feel devalued. So I can appreciate how that might be useful.
You know, the thinking's still a little bit broad strokes.
Mm-hmm.
What I really loved about this book, before we get into more specifics, is that there's this overarching theme in it. That the book puts mental health in context as a response to our social and cultural lives.
Mm.
And it's done really subtly and quite brilliantly. You're basically saying our emotions, our thoughts, our physical reactions and fantasies, they're not just individual internal experiences. Mm-hmm. They're internal signals, but they tell us something about what it means to be living in this world with other people. And for example,
Mhm.
one of the things you talk about is a fantasy that we are in much more control of what happens to us and of other people's behavior than we actually are, as a way of managing experiences of hate, like biphobia, transphobia, racism, or acts of or moral panic, acts of violence. And it's what you're doing is subtle, because you don't say that outright either. You're not
My
saying
editors didn't allow that. So I would write something that what might have sounded like that, and they would be like, this. They would literally say, "This is too up in the clouds. I need you to break it down."
You know what? I'm glad they did it actually,
Yeah.
because it makes the subtlety stand out even more,
Yes.
and it makes it that you in a way take it for granted in a way that lets us all actually internalize that as a message. So it's a really subtle movement towards destigmatizing mental health as not a moral failure or a disease, but as a response to dealing with a harsh or a loving world.
Right.
I think that can be really hard to remember, but it really is a basic assumption in this book. With all that said, our feelings can be really difficult to understand, though. And this book does such a great job, and you do such a great job of helping us with that. So again, thinking a little generally for a moment, can you talk a little bit more about that, about your philosophy, the philosophy of mental health that is in the book, or philosophy of mental distress, and how you think about that can help us think about mental health, think about physical health,
Yes.
and live more well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I draw on a social determinants of health perspective, which is a big part of my training as a social worker, because in Canada, like, anyone who's worked at a nonprofit or healthcare center in Canada, like, the way you get funding and the way you develop your programs is to connect the programs to addressing specific social determinants of health that are outlined on the Government of Canada's website. So, we're, like, when I teach here in the US, we're always looking at the NASW ethics guidelines. And so we do some of that back home too, because we have to, but a lot of the framing is around social determinants. And so what that means is it's public health language that basically talks about things like gender discrimination, exclusion, precarity in housing, food, difficult childhood experiences leading to poor health outcomes. And there's CMHA, which is the Canadian Mental Health Association, took it a step further to say, well, this looks different when we talk about mental health outcomes, but they only added 3 additional determinants or 3 factors that have to do with exclusion, belonging, and social support. And that's good, but it's so broad. Several years ago, I did a keynote on shame for queer guys, shame and sexuality, and I got a lot of good feedback around it, and people wanted like more. Somebody suggested, why don't you do a full day training? Why don't you do more? And I was like, okay, what are the things that affect queer men's mental health that I can really focus on in a full day training? And the things I focused on were shame, connection seeking in relationships, substance use, and body image. And those were salient, but I think those were things that were very central in my life. And so that became a great training that people loved, but also didn't have time to attend. So I didn't take it on tour the way I had dreamt. But as I expanded my thinking around that, I had read a book there's a psychoanalyst named Mellon Forrest, and she talks about power and privilege and the different, what she calls internal hierarchies within communities. And so stepping away from like, this is lateral violence, she was talking about the nuances of what goes on in different communities. And I thought, oh, I love that idea. Like this idea of internal hierarchies. and proximity to power, and how we're seeking that as a way to feel good or a way to feel in control. And for me, I was then thinking also, like, as every time we have, like, I go to conferences a lot, and when we have conversations about gay men or queer guys and mental health, we usually start with HIV, or we talk about something else and then bring it back to HIV, or we talk about higher rates of something, like depression, anxiety, etc. Substance use disorders is often on the list. And so that label itself, I don't think is so helpful. What's really important for us to look at is what drives that outcome. So I think in terms of population-based mental health, so you could be part of some kind of another, like a particular community, and I'm thinking it's got its own subculture. It has its own internal hierarchies, right? And it could be like how people talk about you or how you're seen in the church, for example. It could be what life is like for you in a small enclave of a big city that is full of an immigrant population that's also your people. It could be about living in a place where you feel quite anonymous, but you're looking for community. My point is that our context comes with signifiers of wellness and power and connection. And we need to think about what those things are for us to then think about what will it look like for me to feel good. Years ago, I remember a friend asking me, like, what do you have to be depressed about? And I was like, I don't know what to say. Like, you're right, my life is, I'm great, my life is pretty fabulous, but also there's days when it's hard to get out of bed.
Right.
And that's not about having a friend or not having a friend. The loneliness can be a driver. That's about internalized shame. That's about not being able to access my optimism. That's about all the feelings that come up when I think about the fun and the tragedy of the summer months when it comes to body image. It's all kinds of specific things that other person wouldn't get.
Right.
Sorry, there's a long-winded answer, but I hope.
No, it's great. And we're gonna divert from our regularly scheduled program. Because
This just in.
Yeah, this just you're bringing up something that's not as explicit again in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the book is really subtly very smart in how you are referencing so much that that people, but specifically queer, trans, gay men, struggle with. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you just referenced is the way we are often pushed, I think, to mask our depression, right? Or to hide it even. To depression pushes us to stay home, to not get out of bed, to not talk about it. Mm-hmm. But masculinity also pushes us to not get out of bed, to not talk about it, to hide it.
Yeah.
And I think a certain kind of queer masculinity pushes us to not talk about it and hide it. So I guess, again, just sort of thinking about this, what do we do about that? As right, when we have so many of these social determinant forces pushing us, including the internal ones, pushing us to avoid connection right when we need it the most.
I mean, for me, I drank, and that was helpful until it wasn't.
Very much.
Yeah, look, I think even though there's lots of specific kinds of exercises in this book, I try not to be too prescriptive around what can help, because, for example, lots of people will go through a 12-step program, and some people will love it, and some people will hate it, and other people will become they'll become like these subjects of an indoctrination that is so rigid that gets in the way of anything else. Similar to people who really struggle with body image and eating, like when you go to a regimented program, I find it challenging because they replace the unhelpful rules with other rules. And those rules are a little bit, they're more helpful because they reduce the symptoms of the first thing, but they don't necessarily set you free. And so I think we need to think about like, what does freedom, autonomy, liberation look like and feel like for us? And when we talk about like depression and alcohol, that's like, it's like the cause and the solution, you know? But I had to figure out why I was drinking before I could talk about the depression. And I had a colleague, when I worked at a health center called Sherburne Health in Toronto.
Famous, right? Like a...
In Canada, yes. Yeah. And I said to her, I was talking to my analyst, and I had been telling him for so long that alcohol helps me connect with other people. And he said, I think it helps you connect with yourself. And so I said this to my colleague who is Indigenous Métis, and she was like, well, yeah, that's the goal of colonization, is to create a fragmented self. And then alcohol is the way that you connect those fragmented pieces.
Right.
And that blew me away. And I'm giving this example because I think it's conversations with trusted people that bring a particular kind of insight that can be life-changing.
Yeah.
Because if somebody else was like, don't do that, it's bad for you, I would have said, don't tell me what to do. You know, you hear it differently depending on who it comes from.
I was trying to quit smoking, this was back when I was much younger. And the first therapist I ever went to, he sat in his office, he goes, so what are you doing ruining your body like this? And I was like, oh, fuck you. Left his office, never went back. The shame involved in it, right? And we're going to get to the shame.
But he also missed something, right? Which is like, if you think about smoking as risk-taking or counterculture, that then becomes about masculinity. And that becomes about being part of a counterculture that is queer.
Yes.
You know, it goes with the leather jacket, it goes with all kinds of things.
Yes.
It goes with not settling down or a heteronormative life. Like to this, like I don't really smoke, but in the moments where I have, I'm like, oh, this is so fabulous. And it's not because I don't care about my health. Like that's outrageous, you know? It's that I'm doing something that makes me feel alive, risky, I'm in touch with masculinity, people are noticing me a different way. It's so much more complex than like, oh, you're doing this self-harm thing. I think that misses the point.
See, for me it was making friends, right? I got
we
to
need
college
those.
where, how did I make friends? I stood outside the dorm and bought cigarettes and offered people cigarets, and that's how I met people, right? But you're also...
Do you now carry a pack just so you can make friends?
No, I don't.
It's a strategy I've heard of.
Yeah. Do you?
No. No. I'm at a place in my life where like I don't want to meet strangers.
I think we do get there. For a while, actually, I carried around a lighter for that reason. Yeah.
Smart.
But you're talking about, how do we decolonize our own mind?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's something I think about a lot with how I conduct treatment.
Mm-hmm.
That if I'm telling someone what to do or what rules to follow, it's just more of the same, rather than discovering who you are and your own experience.
Right.
And then having ownership over that. While I was reading this book, I was thinking about. You call it a self-help book. I don't experience it as a self-help book, actually. Although I get marketing and publicizing.
That's because you weren't in the corner of a bookstore crying by yourself.
It really feels more. The word that just came to my mind is mature than that.
I'll take it.
So yeah, take it. But it 19-year-old JT had the best thing I think I could find at the time was The Joy of Gay Sex. Did you have that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean, I bought it because I like to buy books, but I didn't really read it. Which is also my approach to a lot of books, unfortunately.
Well, I read it cover to cover because I was
do.
like, I need this.
Yeah.
It was also very exciting,
Yes.
But I think about what, 20-year-old me would have differently in a book like this.
Right.
You know, that we can now have in 2025 versus the year 2000 have a book for, you know, young 20-somethings and teens, but also a book for men in their 60s
Yeah.
and 70s to really think about. This is why I say it's not a self-help book, because
Right.
you're asking people to really think about themselves and their experience, rather than necessarily a guide for living. And I think that there's something much more whole about that. So, I have a question related to that. Let me see what my list says.
If you can't find the question, I can comment on that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is
Ask the question.
part of it was just, you know, what drove you to write a book like this? Right?
Yeah. I
As
mean,
18-year-old me is like, yeah, why didn't you write
Yeah.
this 20 years ago?
well, because we're similar ages. And that would have been challenging at the time. For me, I see a lot of, like there's an increase in mental health literacy, and there's lots of content creators on Instagram and TikTok talking about mental health and attachment and
We're gonna get to that.
trauma, like everything's trauma, anyway, and it's fine, like it's good, there's a lot of value in that, but it's not necessarily nuanced, or it can be hard to piece things together in a way that makes sense for your narrative or your story. And so I think, for me, I like the idea. When I see those people online creating content, I don't not like it. I think on its own, it's not super helpful. It just helps us begin asking good questions, but I wouldn't rely on that as treatment or for like personal support. Whereas, if we're moving toward democratizing mental health, making things more accessible, I think having an opportunity to work through actual exercises with instructions on your own is very helpful.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I wanted to do. Like, I had somebody say to me, like in the book there are these empty chair exercises. And somebody had said to me, like, can people really do that on their own? Is it even psychologically safe? Like, should somebody do that in the presence of a therapist? And I was like, it's hard to say. Like, I'm not seeing it as a huge ethical dilemma because people are getting information from all kinds of places,
Yeah.
and it's an invitation. And also, if something feels bad, stop.
Yeah.
But that's like I have to trust that people know that, but also that they might take the invitation to, you know, take something that feels challenging to a therapist or a trusted friend, and to build on the conversation. So if you're like, I don't want to do this exercise on my own, or I did it and it made me feel bad, okay, like the world isn't over. For the next one, talk it through with somebody,
Right.
or skip it. You know, you can engage with it. We have to trust people to take some ownership over how they apply things to their lives.
I think that's right. I think, you know, one of the things you do really well, though, is you ask people to really attend to themselves and their experience in it,
Mm-hmm.
and to listen to their body, to listen to how their body feels, and to use that as a guide.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're in that territory, we can trust people.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, you're referencing these sort of pop psych folks and
Mm-hmm.
self-help guides. The attachment's really big in the
Yes.
pop psych world. I was listening to a podcast recently about a woman who, I don't remember the name of the book, but the book is essentially telling people it's okay to just blame your parents for your problems, cut them off, and be done. And
It is an option.
it's an option,
Yeah.
but what you're doing is a bit different. So
Yeah.
a lot of these more pop psych things, what they are saying to people implicitly, without saying this explicitly, is it's okay to blame the world and everyone else for how you feel and what's happened to you. And while that feels good in the short term,
Yeah.
it doesn't really help us live better and live
Right.
differently.
Right.
And as a therapist, what can be really challenging is holding a space in a sufficient way to help people see, yes, other people have responsibility
Right.
for how they've treated us or what they've done or society, and we need to put responsibility where it's due,
Sure.
but that doesn't mean you're not responsible for your own experience too.
Yeah.
You don't have that problem here.
Yeah.
You've created a book where you're doing both kind of really, again, it's quite subtle and very, it's quite an achievement.
Well, thank you. I will say though, if I may, that like, I think it's important to acknowledge systemic oppression in all the forms that it takes, and also to recognize that like, therapy isn't gonna solve systemic oppression, right? And the most that we can do and I'm not saying we only operate on an individual level and forget everybody else, but the most you can do day to day is think about what's going on in your mind, how the outside world has affected you, and then think about how you want to spend the next several days. And it could be about connecting with somebody, it could be about changing how you think, it could be about like contextualizing your current experience in a larger story about your life. That likely will be good for you.
Right.
It's not gonna solve the thing outside, it's not gonna make it go away, but that could be better, you know? And so, you know, I've had lots of people tell me like, you know, therapy, I don't know, it's not macro social work, it's not gonna solve all the problems. And I'm like, macro social work isn't either.
Right.
You're gonna be lobbying and writing policy, you're gonna be doing things that also feel very subtle in terms of people's everyday experience. So we need to do things on all fronts.
Right.
And if the world collapses, well, maybe you'll have a good alternative thought to go down with.
Right, I mean, that's the thing, you don't let society off the hook, but you don't let an individual off the hook either. To say, you don't get to just give up on your life.
Totally.
Right, you challenge yourself, you challenge society, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And I mean, how do you I'm sort of curious, how is it that you just sort of sit in that place quite naturally with who you are? What do you think you might bring to the table that other people can learn from to create such an easy balance with that?
Yeah, I mean, so if I think about the chapter on internalized shame, right? I talk about depression, and for me, there was internalized shame around sexuality, of course, and being a femme guy, but a lot of shame around being racialized, being South Asian, being immigrant. Like in my last relationship, I told my partner Mason, I was like, he had bought these new white sheets, and I was like, oh, white sheets are terrible. They're gonna look gross in 2 weeks. And he was like, well, we're gonna wash them every week. And so later that night, we were.
My partner's in the crowd, and I hope listening.
But we that night I said to him, I was like, Mason, you know what? I think what's happened here is I think I'm dirty, and that like I'm gonna rub off. And he was like, I know. Let's go to he was always trying to get to sleep before because I snore, so he wants me to shut up so he can focus. Otherwise, it's game over.
I know about that too.
Yeah. So, but there are these insidious ways in which I think we internalize messages around ourselves. And for me, that was a particular one around race, where, like, I remember, if I were to connect that story to like many years ago, like grade 6 or 7, one of my friends saw my family at parent-teacher interview, and they were like, "You're the darkest one in your family. How come? Are you adopted?" And this is terrible, but I said, I was dropped in mud as a child. And that's like, I don't know where I got that from, but that's a weird thing to say.
It is weird.
That's a weird thing to say.
But it's also a very, it's weird, but it's also, they put you on the spot. And it's a very disarming thing to say when someone puts you on the spot.
Yes.
And to find humor as a defense to move away from someone's microaggressions.
Right. And
which
I
you
was
go into in
far
the book
from
also.
having the language for that at the time, right? And I also remembered I was on this like basketball. It's not really a league, but it's like after school, whatever. It was like a class, a league, something. And I would play basketball on like Tuesdays and Thursdays, and my mom would take me to this Catholic school nearby. And I was actually good, which is surprising because I am no longer. But there was this guy who wanted me to be on his team and nothing felt better than another guy picking you to be on your team, especially when you're like, oh, I don't know about boys. And he said the strangest thing. He's like, you know, I'm usually not friends with hairy people, but you're very nice. And I didn't understand that at all. But I was very aware, because I was like grade 4 or 5, and I was like very angry that I had body hair. And I remember thinking, oh, my goddamn family, like this is their fault. These are those bad genes. But what I'm getting at here is there's ways we internalize shame throughout our lifespan that have to do, they often, I don't know, they could be about anything, but they often have to do with something that is part of a marginalized identity or a marginalized experience. And it's easy to compartmentalize that and then think, oh, I came out and I have friends and I'm fine. Like, you're not fine, right? Like, you think that you can't buy white sheets because it doesn't just activate shame, it activates disgust.
Right.
And that's like,
well,
horrible.
I mean, those two things are quite linked, aren't
Yes.
they? Right? Like, shame is a way of internalizing other people's disgust of us.
Yes.
Right? And then we make it our own. And then it becomes really insidious.
Yeah.
Right? I want to I'd love to talk more about shame.
Yes.
But I also am realizing I think you and I could talk for a very long time.
Oh yeah, keep
And
time.
I'm watching time a little bit. So I want to make room for some other things as well.
Okay.
One of my favorite parts of the book is you have a chapter on heteronormative milestones
Yes.
and queering life's developmental milestones.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems so obvious to me that we would need to do that, but again, it's just not. We don't do it. So
Yeah.
I've highlighted some sections I can read, but why don't you just tell me a little bit about what is that? What does it mean to take life's milestones and really make them our own?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about us as having been socialized by a dominant hetero cis world, and we can't help but internalize those values.
Right.
And then we are in a queer world, particularly queer men's communities, where we're socialized by a whole other set of values and norms and ways of being. And I think what lives inside of us is like a constant and continual conflict. And that conflict isn't bad. It helps us make choices about who we want to be. So being confronted isn't always bad. However, when it comes to milestone heteronormativity, there's two things that come up. One is we do a slew of things that ought to be recognized and celebrated, but they go unnoticed. And the other thing is when we celebrate the milestones of other people, whether they're queer or straight, if they fit into a heteronormative model, and you don't fit into that model, it could bring up some feelings for you.
Ooh, can I give you an example?
Oh, I would love that.
So
Tell us all about your life.
we don't have to.
Okay.
No, but I grew up in a white Italian Catholic environment, and one of the things that happens when you go to family weddings is the more traditional, usually in a fairly traditional wedding, the DJ will say, okay, if you've been married, if you're married, come to the dance floor. And if you've been married 5 years, stay on the dance floor. If you've been married 10 years, stay on the dance floor. And so at the end, what you have left are the old folks who've been married for 50, 55 years. And I remember being there and just thinking, well, I can't get married. I'm not allowed to be here and there. And what an act of rejection at this really important time when this is about community being together.
Yeah.
And it's so, the word I want to say is insidious, and how it just gets its claws in you. And so now you're taking that and you're saying, all right, but we need to own that happens, and we need to recognize and celebrate our milestones. So what would that look like?
So,
Or what comes to mind?
I think if I think about my milestones, some of those of my clients, like learning to think about and live out the possibility of singleness as a gay man. Like the idea of a relationship is nice. I may have one, I may not. To say I don't necessarily want to center my life around the idea that that has to be an end goal. That headspace shift takes a lot of work. It comes with like grief, anxiety, a lack of words or language to describe it. That's a milestone.
Yeah.
Coming out to your healthcare provider or being like, no, I need an anal swab, you're not listening.
Yep.
That's a mile, like,
Yep.
straight people don't do that. You know?
Or just coming out in general. And
Coming out in general, yes.
Recognizing it and celebrating it for the developmental milestone it is.
Yeah.
As a huge event.
Totally, and to even think about, I imagine a lot of us have a moment where we finally got why it was called Pride. Where we're like, oh, like,
I have my pride shoes on.
love that. Like because I had a moment where I was like in Toronto and a friend of mine, a straight friend, she was a nurse, she was a few years older than me. She was like, I'm gonna take you to this thing. And I snuck out of the suburbs. You don't really, like there's buses, but it was snuck out in that I didn't tell my family. And, like, there's like a mild narcissism of like victimhood where you're like, oh my God, what if they see me on TV? It's like, nobody's gonna see you on TV. But
no,
it's
actually,
a fear.
Well, but in smaller towns, so I'm a social worker partly because my best friend's mom was a social worker.
Oh.
She became my kind of home away from home in
Wow,
Minneapolis.
yeah.
And I'll never forget her telling me, I wasn't out yet, but she made a point to tell me that she had a patient who was photographed at the Pride Parade in the local news.
Oh,
And the terror that the parents would then see them. So it's not out of the question, actually.
Okay, thank you. So I think I was so worried about the anxiety of being found out or seen. It took a moment, or it was a moment to say, oh, I could be proud of this thing.
But I'm going to challenge. But now I'm going to challenge you
yourself?
because
Oh.
no, I'm going to challenge you for listen to your own book
Oh,
because
God.
look what just happened, right? You said I had this idea and maybe it actually wasn't a real idea, but it made me really anxious. But actually, no, it is a real idea and a real fear, and that anxiety comes from a real system of homophobic interaction with the world, right? So take your own advice.
You won. Another milestone, I think for a lot of folks is coming out as trans, but like a particular shout out to people who identify that later in life. Because I think gender exploration should be, they should rewrite the textbooks in psychology, be like, gender exploration is lifelong, but also we should create lots of space for it early in life where it's exploratory, there's no punishment, and all of it is celebrated. Because a lot of us carry so much pain and fear of reprisal in a way, that when we finally can say, oh, I think I'm a he/they person, or I am trans, or I am non-binary, whatever it is, that's a process. Girl, that doesn't just, despite what people will say, that's not just a fad. It takes a minute to get there, you know? I want to go back to your experience at the wedding, though, if I may.
Sure, yeah.
Just to say that part of what I wrote in this book was to talk about milestone heteronormativity, to signal the unique experience that happens. Because you could use another word. You could say shame, you could say anxiety, you could say exclusion, but there's something that happens when even present day I could go to a straight wedding or a baby shower or a retirement party or a work thing or whatever it is, and I want to celebrate that person, but I feel a mix of envy or resentment. And it could even be at a queer wedding. And it's not that, it's not that I can't have that thing that they're doing. It is I might not think it's possible, or I've consciously chosen something different, but it still brings up something where I'm a kind of grief, if you will, about what my life won't look like, and I'm grieving it because it would be nice if a similar kind of celebration or acknowledgement could happen.
Right.
And so you're just I'm reminded that I'm dipping my toe into a world that I've not chosen for myself, And it's hard to confront that regularly. Because the world I've chosen for myself, like if I were polyamorous or in an open relationship, or my life was made up of a series of casual partners and close friendships, that model of kinship is not going to be recognized as that. And so that's a painful thing.
Right. You know, we're talking about a few of the themes in the book,
Yeah.
including connectivity and belonging, but also grief and rejection.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go? Which direction do you want to go? Do
I'm
you want to talk
obsessed
about
with
connection, grief?
I'm obsessed with grief these days, so let's do that.
Okay.
And it's rainy outside, it just fits.
No, I think, we live in a culture here in the US. We live in a culture that doesn't like grief, doesn't want to grieve, really splits off grieving as a normative experience and wants us to see it as bad. And when we are allowed to grieve, it's only allowed to be for a short period of time, right? A week. You get to take a week off from work when you have a death.
I knew someone in New York City that just got 3 days after his mom died.
Right.
She's like,
My dad died in 2020, and it took me 2 years of full-on grieving, and I would say I'm still actively grieving, just not as harshly.
yeah.
I now am able to talk about his death anniversary, right? But you're talking, in the book, you talk about a particular kind of grief.
Yeah.
Right, you talk about disenfranchised grief. So tell us a little bit about that and what you mean.
So disenfranchised means like unacknowledged.
It's brilliant, it's a great concept.
Oh yeah, thanks. And I didn't come up with
I'm
disenfranchised.
pretending you did.
Okay, great. Let's go with it.
But it's also a very particular kind of grief that we don't ever talk about.
Yeah. So the authors that first came up with that concept of unacknowledged or disenfranchised grief were talking about what happens when you have, like, if you experience pet loss, or somebody dies who you were in an extramarital relationship with and you're not their legal partner, or what happens when you feel the sadness of a family member being incarcerated, or what you experience when somebody dies as a result of overdose, or something drug related. And
I think about it as I mourn the group of people that I didn't get to be mentored by because of the AIDS pandemic.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And growing up, who do I have to talk about that with?
Yeah.
Am I even allowed to mourn the people that I never met?
Totally. And that's a great example of like what this looks like in our community. I think I wish we didn't live in such a body conscious culture. I feel like I was just telling somebody asked me how I felt about my body, and I'm like, I'm grieving the body I had 10 years ago. And he's like, well, how do you feel now? And I'm like, I don't think you know how grief works. And I don't have alcohol, so like what I'm saying is I sleep a lot. Don't look in the mirror, that's what's happening.
This is why we're friends.
Yes. My point is that grief is a response to loss. And there's lots of loss that's not death related or death specific, right? And so the loss could be about, when I talk about the body I had 10 years ago, that is about sexual currency or the way I understood myself participating in certain parts of like gay men's culture. There's a big grief has been masculinity, and it's like where I can travel to and feel reasonably safe, and where I might feel anxious. It's like thinking about a horribly homophobic experience that I had, like a violent one when I was just 18, 19, and thinking about how awful that was, and it left a mark, I think, in my life. But also, I thought, if I showed up in the world in a different way, that whole thing might not have happened. And I don't mean to blame myself, but that is a funny thing we do, to feel a sense of control. And then there's a lot of sadness about what life could have been like. And masculinity,
the life we didn't have.
Yeah, and masculinity also is like, I see that in gay culture too, right? Like, what kind of attention would I get if I showed up a particular way? Like, people regularly are like looking for fit, muscular mass. If people are interested in you, the first thing they ask about it is like, are you hung? And you're like, well, I mean, it depends on the temperature outside, actually. I don't know, it's, like if it's winter, no. But these are these are all signifiers of masculinity. And those aesthetic requirements and conditions activate not just any kind of shame, they activate a kind of belief around like what I'm not and what I don't have access to. And so masculinity is a big one. And another one is even like neurodivergence and understanding and realizing that you are not neuronormative later in life, which I think happens to a lot of queer people. And I had someone tell me like recently, like, do you think we all just want a label, we want to be disordered? I'm like, maybe, but that misses the point. The point is, what we're talking about is how we experience ourselves on the margins and like as supporting characters of a film that we didn't get invited to really participate in. And we're thinking about what it would be like if we could be in the center of that. And I think that's why we're obsessed with Mean Girls. Not because we're mean, because we want to be at the center of a thing. And that was hard to do for a long time. And so I think there's grief around that. And we compensate in ways, well, in a variety of ways. Not everybody goes to sleep early. Some people are then mean to other people as a way to cope.
Some people drink and use drugs, right?
Right.
Which you talk about also in the book. And, I am, chapter by chapter in the book, I was impressed by just how much compassion you implicitly have for the human experience, for people, and in the way you write, how that compassion just translates naturally to the reader.
Socially even, I always say to people, you're a good human. And I say it because it's funny, but also, I do think people are essentially good, and when they behave badly, really they're in pain. They're grieving. They're struggling with something that they don't have the words or language or tools to deal with. And so they became awful, and they have a way to return to another state of being.
Right. Let's go back a bit too, because part of grieving is recognizing loss.
Yeah.
Right. The two are siblings, right? Grief and loss. And there's a study that's been done recently, came out in the last couple of years, out of a buddy of mine conducted it out of Mount Sinai. And one of the things he showed is that when folks move, when they immigrate, they are 30% more likely to experience severe mental health disturbance.
Yeah.
And the best protective factor towards alleviating that risk is finding a community you belong to, you belong in. And I think that, these days we think of immigration as big picture immigration from one country to another for any kinds of reasons.
Right.
But there's a lot of immigrating intranationally among the queer community, needing to leave communities that are unsafe, or just wanting to find a community that you do feel more belong to. But then we queer people of color particularly, move to cities that might have a dominantly white gay community, and belonging is then still challenging. So how do we work better together at creating belonging for ourselves in our community so that we can thrive? Because one of the things you talk about is just how important connectivity and belonging are to mental health. You have a whole chapter dedicated to it.
Yeah, so I think on an individual level, a person would need to think about the moments where they feel really down. And what are your motivations and what do you dream of when you're feeling down? Like, what do you want? And those are important moments to say, like, I'm dreaming of something bigger and I need to sustain this goal even while I'm feeling good. So, for example, I'll say for me, I was having a lot of casual sex, using a lot of drugs. All of that was great, but when you come down from things like MDMA and GHB and like all of the things that I was taking, the thing that I would feel is like, oh my God, I'm so lonely. All those relationships are superficial. And that's not completely true. The relationships I made when I was high or partying, they're real, but they're context specific. And so in those moments, if I look at what the unmet need is, it's continuity of relationships in different contexts. So instead of waiting till my crush dissipates and then running to the gym and you know, getting back into a dieting headspace, which I did a lot, and then just to prepare for the next weekend or the weekend after that, I could say, that thing that I wanted, I don't have to stop doing the partying, but the thing that I wanted, I need to cultivate that somehow, right? I need, like, so that I can have like something in multiple contexts. And so I think moments of like depression isn't great, obviously, but the moments of sadness, I think they're important ones for us to think about who we are, what we want, how we want to live our lives, what's possible, and what the unmet need is. And so, in terms of like I think the immigrant experience, when I think about newcomers to Canada, a lot of, and I worked at a clinic where like a focus was newcomers, and one of the things people would say to me is, I really thought Canada was going to be something else. I thought it was going to be like just this gay haven, and that everyone was accepting, and that it was, and I was like, it kind of is those things at that bar, at that intersection. But like, you came from a place that was, where you experienced homophobia, surveillance, violence, but you also had community, you knew people, you had safety, resources, you had a mastery over the environment, like you knew what to expect where. Maybe you were part of a dominant racial community, so you didn't experience racism. And all you had was your imagination about what Canada was like. And now Canada's like, things are far apart. Transportation is expensive. You're experiencing racism for the first time. There's an exclusivity people talk about in gay or queer communities where you're like, I'm having a hard time making friends. I'm like, yeah, we're not friendly. Yeah. You know, and so those are
we
hard.
fetishize each other.
Yeah, say it
Right?
again.
We fetishize each other.
Say more. Let's
So,
keep talking about it, yeah.
So a buddy of mine moved from New York, got a job in Texas, in Austin. Really excited about it, had similar fantasies of Austin, this liberal queer haven. But as a brown man, he found it really hard to find a place to belong.
Yeah.
That he was either rejected or fetishized for being brown.
Right.
Unsurprisingly, he moved back. Not that New York is necessarily all that much better in many ways, but there's a place for him to find where he can belong.
Yes.
Right.
I think being relegated is really interesting. Like, I live in Alabama right now, and every time I get into an Uber, the people will often be like, "Are you a student?" And that's because people who look like me are international students. Otherwise, you're either white or you're black. And so sometimes I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a student," and other times I'm like, "No, I'm a faculty at the university here." And it's like, it actually doesn't matter at all. But to me, there's something about me that gets very righteous. I'm like, no. There's another way that I could be here. How dare you? And like but similarly, you know, like I was in Seattle last week for a book event, and a couple weeks, whenever, and in an Uber, and the guy says, I was with my brown friend Joash. He's from South Africa. Originally, I'm from Toronto, and he's like, the driver's like, "Do you guys work in tech?" I was like, what is this? Like, this is just, like, come on. Like, it's too much.
Part of what you're bringing to my mind is your book is about, you know, it really centers around the queer experience.
Yes.
But we are also more than queer. We are human in all these kinds of different ways.
Absolutely.
And so we interact with the world at so many different registers. Mm-hmm. Our queerness is an important part of that.
Yes.
But it's also not the only part. We're often put in situations of feeling like we have to choose one or the other. And what if we don't want to choose?
I can't be not visibly queer. I thought I could, but it's not possible. I was at an event just a couple months ago in Alabama, and somebody, there was a girl from Nigeria, and I was talking to my friend, she came up to us, and she was like, have you guys been to the gay bar in town? And I was like, no, I go to bed at 9:30. And then she said, oh, okay, because I'm a lesbian, and I've gone, and I'm just looking for people to go with. And I was like, oh, okay, well, talk to Hannah, she's got more energy. And then this person went away, and I said to my friend Hannah, I'm like, how did she know we were gay? And Hannah looks at me and she's like, are you for real? And I was like, well, I thought I was wearing something that would make me fit in more. And it's not possible, you know? So there's some signifiers of queerness that like if you lean into or they come naturally to you, you can't hide. And so it's a nice thing, and it can also it can make you a target in some ways.
You know, so it's about 4:15.
Yeah.
We have,
We'll do the thing.
I figure 15 more minutes and then we'll move forward? What do
How
you
do
think?
people feel? I think I saw a yawn even. Not to call anyone out.
What?
No. They're good humans. But
Let's take a couple more minutes, because
Okay.
I want to get to our audience, but I want to, there's one more really important thing I want to
okay, do it.
You towards the end of the book, you make a point to write a whole chapter on health and mental health services,
Right.
and how when queer people are engaging with health and mental health services,
Mhm.
what can go wrong and how we can get the care that we need, right?
Yes.
So, you know, when I was a younger man and looking to find a therapist, I called a woman and I said, you know, are you familiar with working with queer people? And she just cackled in laughter that I used the word queer, and she was like, queer, what are you talking about?
Because she was a lesbian or no?
No, I think it was unique for her to hear the word queer at the time, used in a
I see.
positive way.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, I slept through that appointment because I was not going to. But
That was your first lesson in the unconscious. Great.
I had a health problem, and the doctor I was seeing was convinced that I had a STI. She sent me to get tested, test came back negative. I said, we still have a problem here. She sent me to get tested again, because she was like, well, you must have an STI. I mean, the way that...
You're a homosexual.
Exactly. The way that being queer is read as dirty by healthcare professionals. And so there's an assumption that we must have, say, an STI because we're sexually promiscuous, or because we have multiple partners, or we don't live the way that they expect us to. So when folks are looking for healthcare services, mental health services, what should we be on the lookout for to help protect against those kinds of experiences?
Right. Well, okay. I think one thing is...
Again, 22-year-old me would have loved this book, because
Yeah.
I would have run for the hills way sooner.
So the way I approach it in the book, so your access to healthcare is determined by so many things that are not about you or what's going on in your mind. So the way I approach it is like, what do you anticipate is going to go wrong? And what are you going to tell yourself that is more helpful? And how might you advocate for yourself? And what might you plan for if it doesn't go the way you anticipated? Because I've had similar experiences where I remember a doctor, I wanted to get an HIV test, but I didn't know how you could even get HIV. But I said to the doctor, I was like, I think I need an AIDS test. That's the best language I had at the time. And he was like, oh, okay, why? And I was like, well, I'm bisexual. I was bisexual then. Like that month, you know. And
See, they're still laughing.
no, they're awake. And then, so he ordered this test, and when I went for my follow-up, he stepped outside his office door, and he yelled to his receptionist. He's like, I forget her name, but let's say, you know, Pam, I need this patient's AIDS test. And it's probably not the worst thing. It's probably like, it's not the worst, like, it didn't make me feel good. I felt really like,
It's a breach of privacy.
yeah, I felt very exposed, because my brother and I shared the same doctor, and my brother was in the waiting room, and so he later told me, he's like, that was really loud, and I was like, yeah, but he was more upset at the doctor, so for doing that, and I was like, oh well, I guess what are we gonna do? But there's something there about like, I knew even then, like you don't have the option to be outraged at the moment, you know? And it would have been great if he gave me some post-test counseling, because that test came back negative because I like given a blowjob to one person in my life, like, and that's not even a risk factor, like, but he didn't give me anything after that, and so.
Or to wonder why you think you need it.
Yeah,
Right?
and so, like, you know, now we live in a time where you can look at Google reviews and that kind of thing, but if I were to go back to that younger self, or if that was me now, the thing is like, how did that make you feel about yourself? What message are you walking away with? And what do you want to say to this person the next time you see them? Or if you were to go to another provider, what are you going to ask them specifically to do around privacy, conversations, and the kind of education you need?
Right.
And that's a lot to put on a patient. It's a lot. But that's what we got to do.
I think so. I mean,
How do I get this thing? How do I treat this thing? Like, I need to know.
we are so often, you know, our personhood is so often negated in the healthcare mental health system.
Yeah.
And what you're advocating for, we're helping us look at is how we reclaim that for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work to do that.
It is.
It's a hell of a lot of work, and it's
Yeah.
exhausting. And it's exhausting to do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
But it does allow us to be our own person.
Yes.
It allows us to take back our subjectivity so that someone else doesn't get to tell us who we are.
Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit. I remember I worked at Hassle-Free Clinic, which is an HIV STI testing clinic in Toronto. And I went to do that work. Most social workers don't do that. It's usually a nursing person who would do that job. But what I loved about it was I got to work with a lot of people who were anxious. I didn't like that they were anxious, but they were anxious. And so when people are anxious, they're in a different headspace where they like want support. And it was a great time to be with like my people and also be humorous and be comforting and provide education. And I remember when I first started there, I was shadowing my friend Sean, who he was about to draw blood, and the patient was like, is it gonna hurt? And he's like, girl, love hurts more. I'll take your right hand. And he just did it so seamlessly. I remember that because I was like, oh, I'm gonna be this bitch, you know? And I was, and people who came for testing said that they appreciated the lightness, the humor, and like the education. There's people who tested positive with me who later came back and were like, you know, I really appreciated this thing you said. And I wasn't always like, condoms. Like that crossed the person's mind already. Like they know about the thing.
Right.
It's all the other stuff.
Right.
And so I think that's the kind of care we need, you know? Not necessarily humorous, but seeing a person outside of their anxiety or outside of the problem, whatever that is.
Right. Seeing a person as a person.
Well, yes. Yes. But in that specific context, like it's not so outrageous. Like I've told straight providers this, I'm like, it's not so outrageous that this person prioritized connection over condom use. Or prioritized fun and like was longing for, curious about, eroticizing the experience of something that you've labeled as risky. Like that is all, that's part of that human experience that you need to not be so reductive about.
All right, let's shall we move on?
I think we should.
Oh, okay. I'm having a lot of fun with you.
I'm having the most fun.
I could do this for a while.
And we have been.
Rahim had an idea.
Yes.
So we're gonna take
5 minutes.
yeah, 5 minutes I think is good. We'd like to ask the audience to turn to your neighbor, and if we have an odd number of folks, maybe a little threesome, and Just take a few minutes to think together about one thing in the conversation that might have spoken to you or that might have stood out as especially relevant to you. And if you're at home and online, maybe do a little journal about it for yourself. If you're not sitting with a friend, to think about, what about anything we're talking about really stands out as something you might want to talk more with a friend about.
Love that. And then we'll dovetail into a Q&A, so
Yes.
if we can indulge you, or you can indulge us.
Let us get some more water.
Yeah, and yeah. Anyway, that was.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah. And it is hard sometimes, it's tricky too, because sometimes I feel people want to kind of perfect for life. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's years, right? Yeah. Right, and that's hard, and a lot of people also the part like kind of introducing yourself, your story, your background, and all over again. Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, sure. That's right. Yep. I don't know what it
Okay, great.
The two of us are together.
Your book is amazing. I mean, my approach is. Anyway,
He's told me a little bit
When we were ever since then, we're like, we're safety and I'm literally on the way over here, I was like, I need to make sure I'm right. So you don't need to stop them for you.
I'm terrible. I am on my body a lot.
title. He's great.
Like my friend, I was staying with my friend in Seattle last year, and could not believe he went to work, came back and was from the spot. And I didn't do anything, and he was like, oh my God, I'm drinking, I'm not drinking. Right. And that might not always be the case, depending on
I know it was Miguel Diaz.
So you are much more anonymous than you let yourself than you let me.
I would say when I talk about my treatment modalities, I would say it's, I say psychodynamic, because yeah, that's right, yeah, those are the things I'm trained in.
But you analysis for this.
Are you coming back? You better come back.
Okay. All right, we'll bring everyone back. You know, Rahim, you told me you can be very verbose. I don't think you accounted for how verbose I could be.
Correct.
What time are we going to go to? 5 o'clock? 5:30?
Let's see how many questions we get.
Okay. All right, folks. We're gonna open up the floor for a Q&A.
If people have questions, they're not too exhaustive.
Yeah.
But like, we hope you're not
We
too
want them to
exhaustive.
ask questions.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Don't let them off the hook.
Okay. Everyone
This
has to ask one thing.
Yeah, maybe. And I have more. So for those who can't see online, we're an intimate crowd here.
Of 40 people.
So if you have a question, unfortunately we're not taking questions online. But if you have a question, raise your hand, speak loudly. I'll repeat the question for folks online. If I cut you off at any point, it's not because I don't think you're interesting and what you have to say is not interesting, but we do want to give Rahim a chance to answer. And we want to give other people a chance to ask questions. So if I do cut you off, just respectfully hear me out, and we'll move on. All right, anyone who's up?
I'll start. I was really interested in the idea of like decolonizing your mind. And I know you guys kind of briefly touched on it, but do you have other advice for somebody looking to do the work to undo all this sort of shit you've been trying?
So I'll just repeat it for folks. The question is essentially, can we talk more about the idea of decolonizing one's mind, and how do we work to begin to undo all of the internalized shame and control, forces of control that have been put on us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will.
Is this like a together thing, or am I just
Oh,
giving you
did you wanna-
space? No. I'm just,
We could all share.
yeah, we
Should we all have a thought?
No. This is
Okay.
about you. Come on.
Okay. I would say that while my book doesn't specifically talk about like a decolonial approach to mental health, I think our environments are socializing agents, right? So if I wanted to decolonize desire, for example, I might think about the kind of porn I watch, or the kinds of spaces I want to be in. So I think about like 15 years of party going and drug taking. Like, it was nothing wrong with it, it was great. But if I'm thinking about desire, decolonizing, I was participating in something that was giving me proximity to what I thought was people with power. And I wanted those people to like me. And it's possible that that could happen. Well, thank you. But it doesn't say a lot, like, when it doesn't go the way I want, it's not gonna feel very good for me. And in that process of sexualizing a particular physique, mostly of white men, not always, there's an inadvertent like desexualizing of myself and my people. So for me, I've had to think a bit about like, what spaces am I going to? What am I consuming? Because those environments are socializing agents. And they're gonna teach me about like, not just what's desired, but what's celebrated, what's valued, what's prioritized. And so I think shifting that. I know people I know a lot of gay men do non-monogamy, but in poly communities in particular, people talk about the relationship escalator. And essentially they talk about the expected trajectory of a lot of relationships and how they want to resist that. And the reasons why it doesn't work for them. I mean, there's an overlap between that community and our community, but I don't hear queer guys talk about it so explicitly. And I think that could be helpful to say, I don't just want to do non-monogamy, if that's what you want, because it's cool or it's the new norm, but like it's because something else isn't working for me. So I think when we're given a template to question it and to take it apart a bit is decolonizing. It's also deconstructing. It's also queer resistance. It can be labeled many things. So if the question is for you specifically, you know, I think the question I would ask myself is, if I were in your shoes, is what do I do that goes according to a script that was handed to me? And if it's not working, what are the things I need to do to change it? Not behavior change necessarily, but what needs to change about my environment so that that script isn't being reinforced all the time. Like I've had to say to myself, like, hand to God, like I can't go to too many weddings. There's a limit to how many I can do a year. I don't care if it's gay or straight, but I'm like, there's a limit. There's like one or two most. I don't have it in me. I don't have it in me. That's not a life that I see myself having. And it brings up a lot of feelings to go to attend. And then like I'm affected by those feelings 3 days later. Like I have to go back to work, you know?
Yep.
So if that's gonna make me feel bad, I'm gonna not do it, right? And that is not that I don't like them, it's that it can feel like such an affront to the way I'm trying to organize my life. It could be a few years down the road where I have good alternative thoughts that help me manage that and tolerate it. I'm not there right now, so, yeah.
And being okay with not being there, right? That's and that you can talk to other people about that, or you can let folks know, I care about you, but I can't go to your wedding, and that's okay, right? I think this plays out in very subtle ways also, right? What Rahim is saying about do we have the space to question our own experience and why we think and feel the way we do, why we want to be in certain spaces the way we do. Ken Corbett, a psychoanalyst here in New York, has an idea.
Does she have a book?
He does have a book.
Fine.
He has a book.
We'll hear it.
I think his book is like Boyhood Femininity or something like that.
It's
a good book. But he has an idea around regulatory anxiety.
Yes.
That anxiety does a lot of things, but one of the things anxiety does is control.
Mm-hmm.
And it controls our behavior. And that doesn't mean we should have anxiety come up and say, oh, I'm gonna do the exact opposite thing, or I'm gonna push right through it. No, because that could be dangerous in a different way. Mm-hmm. But to be able to turn up the volume sort of on our own experience, and are we holding ourselves back? Are we not doing something? Are we not engaging in a certain way because of some kind of regulatory system that is enacting itself in our body as anxiety?
Yes.
Right, and just beginning to attend to that is a great first step, I think, too. And that's what you talk about, actually.
Correct.
Right?
It is. Yes. I appreciate that.
All right, who's next?
So my name's Michael. I'm also a queer therapist.
Woo!
Woohoo! One of the things I've been wrestling with, working a lot within this larger topic, is just the label of LGBTQ community and the word community in in particular. And so I'm much less likely to use that terminology. I'm like the LGBTQ demographic because I don't really have another way to put it. But I think there's something about the assumption that shared experience means that relationship will be possible or that it should be possible. And then we talk about internalized shame, right? Like all of us have this internalized shame in this very specific kind of way, yet also unique to us. And then we're all trying to build community together without
Yes.
having built trust.
Right.
And so I'm wondering your thoughts on like the assumption that queer experience is a shared
Mhm.
like foundation for relationship, but also the way in which it can inhibit relationship. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Ooh, that's really good. Let's see if I can sort of
Into the mic, make it happen.
encapsulate it for our online audience. So the question is really about correct me and let me know if I get this right. But our audience members really, Michael's thinking about how broad the LGBTQIA plus community is,
Yes.
right? Especially as we add more letters,
Uh-huh.
more identities, more broaden the tent. We have a very big tent. And that inherently means we're gonna have some shared experience in there. There's a reason we put those identities together, and yet there's a lot of ways our experiences are not similar and not shared. And that's gonna create a tension for us as we have these conversations and think about this. And so how do we, am I correct, how do we sit and work with and hold that tension and conflict
Mhm.
in those spaces? How do we recognize it is a conflict for us?
Yeah. I think there's value in thinking about us as a collective, because that's how mobilizing works in terms, like for political action or social action. I think the person who wrote my foreword, Leo Herrera, he talks about how queerness doesn't exempt you from recreating oppression. If anything, your queerness is a blind spot. And so I think as we make an assumption about sameness, that has its place and its value. It comes with safety or presumed safety, but also it doesn't mean within our community we're not gonna be bad people. And I'm reminded of Alok Menon, who is a non-binary trans person, which I think they live in New York, so everybody probably knows them or follows them. But they recently shared something that said, I'm just trying to remember it. They said that the gay and lesbian movement wasn't necessarily about liberation, because if it was about liberation, people, like cis people, would have fought as hard for equal marriage. They would have fought for trans rights as hard as they fought for equal marriage. And so they said, like, essentially, they didn't want to be liberated from oppression, they wanted to participate in privilege. And so that really resonates, you know, when I think about, like, even on a small scale, when I think about body image or substance use, what is it I want to participate in? What do I want access to? What does it mean to be seen with this person or having that person want to have sex with me? There is a part of that is about power and proximity to it, and as a result then, upward social mobility. No one is thinking about that at 2 a.m. before a hookup, but I would suggest that it's happening in the background to some degree, especially when, if you're been on, you know, a Grindr grid or whatever, and you've been in that headspace where you're ranking, you're like, oh, who should I take home? And if this person says no, then who's my second option? We're actively doing that all the time. So for me, you know, I see us as a community, but I see that coming with an air of responsibility for me to learn about the people in this community and what their struggles are. Yeah.
Well, I think importantly, your book is a mental health guide for cis and trans queer guys,
Yeah.
right? You're not speaking about the experience of queer women.
I'm not, no.
And yet also within the book, you're talking to, you're saying it's a book for trans guys. There's no chapter on menstruation,
There's not.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but some trans guys menstruate,
Correct.
right? And so there's always gonna be gaps,
Mhm.
right? And to be a human in this society means we have to engage with society, right?
Yeah.
It was a huge achievement for my partner and I to become homeowners in New York City,
Mhm.
right? To do that, we had to engage in certain systems.
Okay.
I could feel tons of guilt for some of for that, but I also want to feel really proud of the achievement, right?
Right.
And so, how do we make room for both? Can we?
Want me to answer?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I think you touched on something that's very poignant, I would say, and that is our communities have taken up a lot of language around social justice, anti-oppression, and not just taking up language, but we've come to think in a particular way around oppression, the oppressor, the oppressed, and that's a valuable lens to analyze systems and society on a big scale. But then individually, we need to also create space for complexity and nuances and all that. And that is to say that to participate in queer community and to be politicized and to care about other people, it doesn't mean you have to have a bad life or you have to pretend you're struggling with poverty if you're not, you know? I see a lot of people aligning, like I had somebody I knew years ago, like she was a lawyer, and I remember her saying, we were having a conversation, it was socially, and there was another person there who was like a youth worker, and I'm there as a therapist, and it's very clear what the salary range is, like she's way at the top, and then I was next, and this youth worker, I don't know what they made, but not very much. And the lawyer, she was like, oh, it's hard, isn't it, when you don't know, like when you're between paychecks and you're just like, it's that moment where you're not sure if you should spend or not, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I literally don't have that experience, and you absolutely do not have that experience. Like, you can't, why are you performing this? Like, for what? It's so, I think it's so, like, that's embarrassing, you should be embarrassed. You know? So I think there's a way in which this collective sense makes us perform our identities and collective values in a way that's not genuine. And that is what's harmful. It's not having money to buy a home, it is pretending you're poor so that you could get social accolades of other people, right? Because you might even be like, oh yeah, these are the resources that come with in the world, and I think about how to redistribute them, or how to be a good human, or just acknowledge that the things that are attributed to hard work and other things that maybe I was given in life that other people weren't, that self-reflection is the process, right?
You know, I appreciate you saying, yeah, you should be embarrassed, right? That these, you're not shaming the person, but these
Well,
feelings.
if I went back, I might.
But some of these feelings, they're an important, they're ways for us to also recognize the impact we're having on other people, right? If
Yeah.
shame is a way of saying, oh, I'm being told I'm being rejected, embarrassment is also a way of saying, wait, I might be fucking up here.
Right.
It's the signals go both ways, right? And so you're hinting towards a kind of mutuality that we need to engage with more. And we live in a very narcissistic culture, right?
I think
it's very hard to get that mutuality.
Yes, the guilt you alluded to, you referenced earlier, I think there's a connection between guilt and fear, but also guilt and grief.
Yeah.
I told you I was obsessed. But I think there's a grief there of I have a nice thing, I wish other people could have this nice thing.
Yeah.
You know? That makes me sad all the time. When I'm like, it's shitty that I live in this nice place and I leave my house and this person doesn't have anything and the people around me see this person as a nuisance. That's a shitty world.
Right.
That's awful.
A dear supervisor once said to me, we were talking about, I was working with a young person of color, and I was talking about that kind of guilt.
Yeah.
And she said, no, the problem is not that you have that or that you got that, but that the problem is that not everyone gets that.
Absolutely.
And I was like, oh yes, that is how I need to be thinking about this.
Right.
Not that I feel bad, it doesn't help anyone that I feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's that how do we make sure everyone else gets the good stuff too? Next question.
Oh, I thought you pointed to somebody who literally didn't have their hand up, and I thought, that's a move.
Yeah. This is why I need question cards. Who would like to ask a question next?
Well, that, so you were mentioning too about like, why doesn't everyone else have these same feelings? And in our conversation before, we were talking about, like, this guide is great for folks, and you mentioned wanting a guide like this when you were a teen, when you were younger. What are some ways that you can suggest to folks listening that we can think like broad strokes more simply to get more resources like this out there? What are things that we can do to start thinking differently and get more stuff like this out to people that need it?
So for folks at home, the question is about how do we work, I think quite actively do the work of distributing resources of all kinds, I think, better in the question, to in more equitable ways.
Right. I think, so one thing that I've done is, so we made sure that this particular book, like, I know your question is big, but this particular book is $20. It's less than a session of therapy, quite a bit less than a session of therapy for most people. And you could spend a whole year working through various chapters, and there's free resources you can download on the New Harbinger website that are supplemental. And I think we need more accessible writing. Like, I'm really happy that I wrote this, and I would be also very happy if somebody else in the next few years came in and was like, oh, Rahim got a few things right, but then there's a whole other set of things he could have gotten, but I brought great, you know? Like, so, well, try it. No, I'm kidding. But like, I think that would be great. I've had a few people, so because I do a lot of talks, I've had people who've said to me, and it's such an honor that they've said this, they're like, I became a social worker because I saw you talk at this thing, and that's the kind of social worker I wanted to be. And I was like, that's amazing, you know? So I think being in community with people, sharing knowledge, not gatekeeping it, making things as accessible as possible is a very important way forward. I also think bookstores and libraries are really, really important. You know, I don't go to the public library as often as I would like, but I hear, like, there was a moment a couple of months ago where I heard, oh, the provincial government in Ontario was gonna tear down or defund whatever, some libraries, and I thought, no. And I was talking to someone and they're like, but do you go? And I was like, it's not about that. We need places where people can go where you're not expected to buy something. Where you could go and just be and have ideas and exchange them. Because if you leave it up to the free market, they're gonna charge you a fee to go to a park and lay something down and have a conversation there. So I think free space and public space is very important. Because if we're gonna talk about belonging as a function of mental health or a driver, I think that's the kind of thing we need to be investing in. So yeah, that's what I've got.
You know, you come to this, we're at the LGBT Center in New York City, right? It is a space, it is that kind of space, right? It is a space where the hope is to cultivate belonging, to offer services where you don't necessarily have to pay. You're also Canadian.
These are facts.
And I wonder, while those of us, some of us in this room may consider ourselves socialists, you as a Canadian, you come from a much healthier system, I think, when it comes to social care and welfare. And I wonder, what do you think being Canadian is a big part of that for you? Do you think there's something you bring to the table culturally that we as Americans, New Yorkers, could learn more from about creating connection? And if that's too political, we don't.
No,
you know,
it's not too political.
We
It's-
do have a current climate that we.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think that, so I teach in Alabama and I taught a social welfare class last term. And I said to the students, let's break out into groups. I want to talk about healthcare and its problems in America and draw from your own experience and make arguments for what needs to change, why, and how you might. And these were like 4 or 5 different groups and everybody was like, healthcare is mostly fine. I think there could be a bit more around programming for preventive health. They should add a nutrition class to high school. I was like, what? Like this is, like, in this country, to get healthcare, you have to be employed. That's crazy. So, like that's actually nuts to me. So they are telling me they've all come from a family where one or both parents were employed and their jobs were high paying enough that their benefits cover both, like the whole family.
Yep.
And that surgeries that they've had, like everything's covered. And that, and when I talk to people about like, when they hate their jobs, I'm like, why don't you leave? I'm gonna lose my health care.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
That sounds like a terrible reason to stay at a job you don't like, you know? So I think from what I've seen, America often sees itself as like a superpower with lots of luxuries and like being at the forefront of science and technology. And it is, but I think that doesn't mean there isn't room to grow and expand and borrow from other places that have done certain things well. And like, when I see and hear people talk about how the insurance system works, it seems really, I can appreciate how challenging it is to find a provider that's queer affirming if it has to be like in your network and affordable and you have to choose a plan that works for you based on, because it's gonna come out of your salary, which we don't do either. So there's a lot of functions or features of it that make accessibility difficult. So I would just say like, I can also appreciate why we need to privatize certain things for like efficiency or to make something optimal. Personally, I don't think healthcare should be one of those things. Like you can make it efficient and optimal with one insurer, your state, just so that like people can access it, right? So I just think like, I'm not against the free market, I'm not against capitalism. I just think like to regulate something that is a human right, maybe it's good if there's one entity that does it.
I mean, we're here in New York. New York has the lowest suicide rates of any state in the country. There's a reason for that. We have the most robust mental health system in the country. You can get a therapist.
Right.
And yet it can still be very challenging to be a therapist here in terms of income. You sent me a job description years back. I almost took it. It was to be a social worker at a clinic in Canada, and I only have to see this many patients a week, and I get paid this much.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. I was blown away. Would have been like.
And you get 4 weeks off to start.
Yeah.
Here, I look at job postings and like very competitive, 10 days.
It was
Like,
twice
what?
it was twice the salary with half the work. And then I think about people in states like Alabama, where there really is low access to mental health care, and the salaries are even lower. And the way that we really, I mean, I think we have a lot to learn from your system of
Right.
how we actually care for people and how we value that. So
Yeah, I think the culture around making it yourself, right? In the South, I've heard the word grit more times than I can count in the last like 8 months.
and not just the kind you eat.
Correct, not just the kind you eat.
Come on.
But well done. I don't love grits, so I'm always like, oh, that's a strange choice for breakfast. But that aside.
My partner just groaned inside my ear.
Oh, do you love grits?
No, he groaned at my joke.
Oh, listen. He's getting older, it's not happen. Anyway, I forgot the question.
Let's find it, let's get a new one.
Yeah, let's get a new one, and then I promise we'll move to book signing.
Yeah, it's time, let's do one.
She's falling asleep, so let's make it happen.
Does anyone have one more question before we begin to wrap up?
it'll be a fun one. How is the writing process for you?
Oh, that's so
Oh,
good.
a process question. I
Yes.
just want to say, Jay, thanks for coming.
So the question is about how the writing process was for you. That's such a good question that it's
Yeah.
very so, because it's so hard.
Yeah. So, I had to create an avatar. This was like the guidelines from the publisher about a client that's a composite of many clients I've had that I could then speak to as I write the chapters. Because what I was submitting to them was unacceptable for a while, and they're like, you have to do this exercise. So everything you say and write, like how would you say to this person? So you're walking them through something step by step. So that was an important learning. That's not a thing I've ever done before. The other part of it was learning to be receptive to feedback. Because like if I'm in a job interview, I'm like, I love feedback. Like, I hate that. I fucking hate feedback. But it's important. And if you can, I think connecting with humility and being like, you know what, this person knows what they're talking about, is a very important part of the process. And, you know, people who are like good at writing, and they'll say you have to have a writing practice, you need to carve out a certain amount of time every day. That was not something I could do. So my publisher gave me deadlines, and then a few days before I was like doubling up Vyvanse, which is like not a thing I would suggest to people, but that is what my process looked like. And the other thing was asking myself, like, what do I really want to say about this topic? So that I make sure there's like bullet points before going ahead to make sure you address those. Because otherwise, like one of the pieces of feedback I got was, this moved from something that sounds poetic that belongs in English literature to something psychotherapy-like to a case scenario, and they were like, it's too many things. But that is how my brain was working, and that is not, that's not linear enough for what this book needed to be. So I needed to think about like, what do I want to achieve? What might the exercises look like? And then write it. So there's like a process of like note-taking, and for me, like writing notes by hand before moving forward.
Thanks. For folks who don't know, writing is hard.
Oh, I hate
Writing
it.
is very, very
I
hard.
don't recommend it.
Just
kidding.
I have to lock myself up to write.
Yeah. Look, it's equal. Like it's a bit of like there's a lot of joy and there's a hint of masochism. It's like and misery, but that's also what I experienced with drinking. So that is an important experience maybe to have.
Well, let's wrap it up. I think.
Let's.
So
We've lost a few girls, folks.
thank you guys for coming. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate having you as an audience, your participation. Thank you, Rahim. Thank you for writing this book. When I say I really like it, really enjoy it, I deeply, deeply and sincerely mean it. I recommend everyone getting it. Rahim, where can people buy the book? Besides here, right here. You can get it today, right now,
So-
buy it.
At the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. That's where I recommend you buy it.
Where else?
You could also buy it on their website. And I would encourage people to check out local independent bookstores. So if you go to bookshop.org and you search for my name or the title of the book, you'll find it. And bookshop.org will help you purchase it from your local independent bookstore. Of course, it's also available on other platforms where people buy books.
Cool. You mentioned this earlier, but there is a whole host of online resources that come with the book that I think are free. You don't even have to buy the book, right?
Correct.
You should buy the book, but you don't have to buy the book to be able to access
Yes.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
Where can people find those?
So there's like, I think about 15 to 18 like supplemental handouts. And if you go to newharbinger.com or the New Harbinger Publications website, again, search for the title or my name, it's one of the tabs, like about the book, resources for the book, tools, whatever. And you can you can download those and use them in your clinics for yourself, etc. And they come with prompts and instructions throughout.
Cool. Where can people find more about you?
Just go to thepoliticizedpractitioner.com. That's where you can find all my links for socials, links to buy the book, handouts, and for my upcoming events.
Cool. And I'll add for myself, if you Google my name, you can find out how to contact me. That's about it. I don't have all the fancy things you have. I don't have an Instagram and a social media and all of that.
That's okay, you're still a good human.
I think that's my whole list.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for your kind words and for being the moderator for this Talkback, and thank you to all of you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all. Thank you both for your compassion and for sharing your wisdom with us. Good night, online audience.